with that, Ezra. Matt, I have a philosophical question for you, not technical, and admittedly we're kind of midstream in the middle of this issue, so not all the facts have come out, I don't know. But I'm curious, with regard to the stand up for animals issue, do you feel that the clerk's office made a bit of an overreach on this, or do you think, should we expect the same kind of aggressiveness if you're elected to that office? Are you going to pursue those types of matters just as diligently?
I think that's a great question, Ezra, and thank you. I think the clerk's office did overstep their bounds a little bit. I think it was deliberate. It was selective. Although I'm going to come out and tell you I'm a government watchdog, and I will be just as diligent with every agency. And I think there's a little difference that I would bring to the table, although apparently in Mr. Maddox's first response, he thinks it's really defined what the clerk does. And I think the clerk's role is more than just financial accounting, it's also financial accountability. So I would look, the clerk's office is integral to all the agencies in the county and can look where resources are, but can also not just balance the debits and credits, can say when are we misspending our money. For instance, I have brought up that we pay for our rent at the public defender's office. And I think that's something that we can consolidate and get into some public buildings. And as a clerk, instead of listening to the public defender say she's coming up for a 5% increase, I would bring it up, regardless of how I do, I would bring it up as a gadfly and say, listen, we should not be spending $250,000 on waterfront property for the public defender's office. And I just cite that as one example. So while you should be diligent with the audits, you should not be selective, and you should also be watching financial accountability. How are our money and resources being used?
What about the move to freeze rather that agency's assets? We're talking about nearly $250,000, and that was, I believe, recently overturned by the 3rd District Court of Appeal.
Yeah, I think that was wrong because I think there was too many factors coming into play. There might have been some bookkeeping errors, but in the same sense, I think that overstepped the bounds and really put the county out for liability in that sense because really the way she may not have been keeping all the money in the right place, but she also had other avenues of raising money. And we made an agreement for that situation to evolve that way, and really before delineating for her as the process went on and as the responsibilities unfolded. So to come back afterwards and lock out all her assets, I think exposed the county to extreme liability. And I really think there was somewhat of a selective process for some other reason that they went after just that agency. Now granted, we did find some problems, which would probably exist almost in any agency if you really went after, or any nonprofit or under contract. You can always find that no one's perfect. I'm not perfect. We all make mistakes, but I do think it was wrong to do that and increase those assets.
Stuart, what would you put in place to keep tabs on equipment and at under $1,000 in the clerk's office?
Well, again, that's a technical question, and it's very clear that in this modern day of technology with barcodes and so forth, you can have a computer scanning barcode method that reads in all of the
Look at the camera.
that reads in all the items into the computer system. Much more important, Richard, than the $1,000 is the big oversight item that the clerk has to be responsible for, including this oversight function that the clerk has, the checkbook, that they control the checkbook, and that if expenses of the county are not legally compliant, that the clerk can turn them down. And that's probably the most critical function of the clerk. We're so with the $100,000 range.
Kevin, this is a follow-up question to that detailed explanation as to what the clerk of the court does. Rather than being kind of like the anointed or the hand-selected successor to Mr. Coolidge and the fine job that he's done over the last 26 years, what does Kevin Maddox bring to this position that's new, that's fresh? Why should the public or elect Kevin for this position, or is this, are you just a representation of a continuation of a job done in the past?
I don't think if the next clerk runs the office as well as Danny Coles, there's anything wrong with that. I'm not going to sit in that seat and think every day, what would Danny do? I know how the office is run, and I know the right way to run it. But I will be Kevin Mack, the clerk, and not Danny's successor, the clerk. The continuity of this office is critically important, though, because the clerk, in my opinion, really is the anchor of county government. I don't think anyone questions the motivation of any decisions that have been made. And what I bring to the office is independence. I haven't worked in any other aspect of county government, so I don't have any intended or unintended influences. Also, business, big things are happening. Business is going along. The Country Regional project, which is being planned right now, we're examining the cash flow issues for a $156 million project. The next clerk will be elected in the November election, but at that same election will be a referendum to extend the 1 cent sales tax. If that's successful, we have to immediately bond that money out. We're looking at cash flows in the Country Regional, and by that time, Aqueduct is going to be spending $18 million a quarter. That cash is coming from our books. We have to have that cash available, or that project grounds to a halt. We're analyzing that right now, planning for it, but there's no delay. If a new clerk steps in, that bond issue isn't going to wait for the new clerk to come up to speed. We're deciding right now whether we can do one phase or both phases at once. The Aqueduct wants to do both phases at once. It looks like the cash flow will be a month or two where there won't be the cash available, but we're planning for that. That's the example of the continuity. Business is happening, the next clerk has to be ready to carry on.
This is a question for Matt. In the past, you have been critical not just of this clerk's office, but I believe clerks around the state for their role in the foreclosure crisis. Can you be very specific in what changes you would bring to the clerk's office with specific regard to those criticisms that you've had of the clerk's offices with regard to the foreclosure crisis?
Sure. One of the most critical components of the clerk's roles in our country is maintaining the land records. And what has happened there is the banks have decided in the last 10, 12 years that they would create their own system to maintain the transfers and title histories in terms of the mortgage assignments. And what they've done is they've evaded the filing fees that would have normally occurred at the clerk's office. Now, county clerks around the state and the nation are suing the mortgage electronic registration system, this third-party corporation, in terms of trying to regain their right to maintain the land records. Now, state statute doesn't require that those filings occur at the county level, but it's implied that the clerk is the place where we keep those land records, and for hundreds of years that's worked well. I think we have to lobby the state legislature to, one, change the legislation to make sure, because of what the banks have done, no one ever conceptualized that someone would usurp the authority of the clerk's office. We have to more define that role of the clerk's office and make it accountable. We have to recapture the filing fees. And most importantly, what that will do is it will restore the integrity of our land records. I've done research on hundreds and hundreds of cases, not just foreclosures, but mortgage satisfactions. And what you have is fabricated documents based off notarizations that were fraudulent. And you're going to have creditors coming out of the woodwork that will make this a legal liability for decades to come if we don't start addressing it. We can stick our head in the sand and say everything's going along fine, but we know it's not. We need more revenue. Part of that's the filing fees that are being evaded, and we need to make sure our tax base is defended, and that is our property values, and that's the integrity of our title histories. We have to address every filing that comes through that clerk's office and look at it like a microscope and make sure there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. We have, as you've seen on 60 Minutes, Linda Green signed tens and thousands of mortgage assignments throughout this country. We have those on clerk's office in Monroe County. We have documents from law firms where lawyers sign mortgage assignments over on behalf of 20, 30 different banks as officers of those banks, and they're not officers of those banks, and people notarize those documents. That right there destroys the integrity of our land records. We have to scrutinize them case by case and let people know that. In fact, Pam Bondi just today recommended that clerks should refer anything fraudulent to the state attorney's office. To my knowledge, that's never been done in our county. The one case that Dennis Ward is looking at is brought to him by Matt Gardy because of the research I've done on the fraudulent filings.
Question for Stuart. You served on the school board's audit and finance committee during obviously one of the more tumultuous times in the board's history. I want to talk to you a moment about transitioning into this new role. While the role of the clerk's office in many ways is that of watchdog, it's primarily that of administrator. I'm curious what you feel the biggest challenge or challenges you're going to be in transitioning to a management role, overseeing the running of an office that has dozens of people. How do you make that turn? How do you make that transition? What do you think will be the biggest hurdle?
Well, Ezra, the audit committee is a volunteer board that I just served on recently, and I'm very, very proud of the work that we've done. I feel if it wasn't for the work of this audit committee, we probably wouldn't be sitting where we are with a new superintendent coming on board and so forth, and we can go into that. And I think I have demonstrated through my work on that audit committee that I have the courage and fortitude to face up to the political challenges and do the right thing regardless of what happens face to face. In terms of my background, that's not the only thing that I've done in my lifetime, of course. And I was also the president of the school board in suburban Philadelphia for 12 consecutive years. My colleagues on that school board who watched my work elected me as their chair 12 consecutive years in a row, just like my peers who saw my work on the audit committee elected me their chair for, again, two consecutive roles. So I have been very, very involved in the management of very large organizations. Not only I was the administrator here in Monroe County for the Child Support Enforcement Office that handled over 2,500 legal cases, taking care of maternity and child support, working closely with the court system in Monroe County. I was elected as an officer of both the Pennsylvania State School Board Association. The governor appointed me on the statewide Hines Insurance Trust. I was an officer of the National School Board Association. Everything that I've done, the people have moved me into higher responsibilities, overseeing very, very large organizations where we've had a lot of success in those organizations. Now, in terms of the transition from the audit committee, that's exactly what I have done on the audit committee. The success that we've had there is exactly the type of thing that I would like to bring to the Clerk of Courts office. I have a very personal reason for running for this office, because in 2005 I did work in county government, and when I was there and I saw problems, I would go to the county commission and the county administrator, and I didn't always get relief, but when I did find somebody who would listen and take care of mismanagement was always Danny Coolidge, who would sit down and listen. I said, oh my God, Danny Coolidge is retiring. It's extremely critical that we replace him with somebody with the same commitment and integrity that has been in that office for those years, and that's the reason I want to run.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to follow up on that. And you were saying there are 93, Kevin, 93 employees, 97 employees. And I guess I would ask you, Matt, what experience do you have in managing employees?
Sure. Well, first of all, I have served as acting executive director of the state attorney's office, which had between 50 and 55 employees. But I think more so is my experience in the U.S. Army. I worked as a civilian that was deploying software, and I was given a directive by stateside Pentagon to go over to Europe and implement technology over there. And the struggle there was I had hundreds of users that were going to be using this software that were under a requirement that I was mandating. But at the same time, they had their own command structure, whether it be at the base support battalion or the area support group. And so you had to make sure that everything you were bringing in and asking employees to do, but not necessarily direct employees, but people that I was managing and asking to perform perform by changing their work and working with a different system. The challenge there was everybody there said, I've got a different boss, but I still had to be able to work with those people and had that challenge. I think we had a very successful deployment of that software system over the course of 2 years over in Europe. And it's, what I always bring out is, I think it's important to be empathetic to those end users. And so when I go out and the systems I've implemented at the state attorney's office, again, I'm not necessarily the supervisor as the tech director at the state attorney's office, but I am sure asking people to do a lot of work and change what their workflow. And at that point I say, I want to know what the end user is experiencing. I don't just dictate, hey, this is the system we're going to use and that's what's going to happen. And I think to some extent that's what's happened at the clerk's office is they have a decent system, the end users haven't really, they've either been frustrated, they haven't been trained with those systems, and it's those systems that actually can create the most cost savings and most enhancements to the public service that are already sitting there. Now, true, they may not be perfect, but the end users need to be able to have somebody from the top down who's going to understand their job role and be empathetic to the way they have to do their job and serve the public.
All right, guys, that's it for Clerk of Court.